We have Asha Ahmed Mwilu. Wow. For now, I'll introduce Asha as an award-winning journalist who spent more than a decade weaving intricate stories of people and their relationship to power through reportage, investigations, and documentary filmmaking. But tonight, Asha is here as a writer who has written her own intricate story. Asha Ahmed Mwilu. Your story. Just give us a quick synopsis and your reading.
So, my story is about my family, actually. The story is called The Dress My Father Bought Me. And I think when you read the story, you will wonder which father. So something happened to me when I was covering the 2017 election as part of KTN. You remember how chaotic that election was, and of course, it ended up at the Supreme Court. So anything that I was doing around the election, I was being accused of like siding with one faction, political faction, because of my name, Mwilu. And many people thought that the deputy CJ, Philomena Mwilu, is my mother. And so from that point, I really felt that at some point in my life, I want to write about my mother, and I want to write about my father and my other father. And so this is the beginning of that. Having been sort of like pushed off the ledge by a friend of mine who said, you must begin to write this story. They know themselves. And so this is the story of my Baba and my dad. The first time I visit Baba in Caliph, after our move with Dad to Savannah, I pack all my 4 dresses and even borrow a few more from my sister for backup. Unlike my sister, who spent most of her childhood in Caliph, fetching water from the communal taps deep in Majengo, and got to witness our parents transition from their madhouse to their 2-bedroom flat in Pumwani high-rise before Ma and Baba's talaka, I am just discovering the inner workings of this place. On the first day, Baba takes out the Quran and asks me to recite Ayatul Kursi. He says it is the most important ayah in the Holy Book. I fluently get through the first 3 lines and then get stuck. Baba's firstborn son from his new marriage, Omari, knows the entire surah. He is 2 years younger than me, and I am embarrassed. Baba notices and quickly steps in to salvage the situation. Ukirudi, usome na ufanye practice. Kila Muislamu ana Quran kwa moyo wake. Kazi ni kuikubali. He says, asking that when I get back to Savannah, I should read and master the Quran, that every Muslim is born with it in their hearts, and their task is to accept it. Baba then switches on the TV to watch the news. You have to know what's happening in the world, he instructs. And now I want to know as many things as he does. Maybe I want to impress him. Maybe I want to be like him. And so I make a point to religiously watch the lunchtime bulletin, even when Baba isn't home. He doesn't have to be present for me to do as he wishes. In the evening, Baba takes me to the nearby Riyadh Mosque for Maghrib prayers. I am wearing my buibui, and once we get to the mosque, he hands me over to a woman who chaperones me at the women-only section of the masjid. Your grandfather built this mosque, Baba tells me. I believe him. Everyone here calls him by a moniker, which means the Sheikh's son. Grandpa was the Sheikh. After the 20-minute prayer, Baba and I reunite outside the mosque and walk hand in hand to Gikomba, an open-air market next to the mosque. The market's tight and muddy corridors are littered with bales of second-hand clothing with a distinct smell. As we snake through the stalls, all the vendors seem to know my Baba, but they call him different names whose meanings will take me decades to decode. In the middle of one corridor, Baba and I squeeze into one of the smaller stalls. A man chewing Mira exchanges pleasantries with Baba, then tells us he has Vitu Moto Moto. The man pulls out a pair of blue and white Reebok sneakers and tells us those are Reebok pumps. He and Baba proceed to tussle over the price as Baba scrutinizes every corner of the shoe. Hii ni ile original? Baba asks. Is the sole intact? Does it have any scratches? Are the insoles okay? In the end, a firm handshake seals the deal, as Baba and I walk away with the shoes. No money exchanges hands. Huyo ni mtu wangu Joe, Baba tells me as we walk back home. That's his homeboy. When we get to the house, Baba plays Bob Marley. I remember every dance step. Point your fingers up, move your shoulders forward, then backward. My brother Omari joins in, and his mother, our mother, smiles in the kitchen. Drop your hands and swing side to side. Slow down even more until the song ends. Baba then turns into the funniest comedian, sending us into fits of laughter. The evening ends with Baba's magic tricks, and after dinner, Baba tells us to recite our Isha prayers, then head to bed. Baba and Mama Omari lend me their bedroom, where I sleep alone. They share a mattress on the living room floor. It's a lot for me. I close my eyes and try to recite Ayatul Kursi under my breath. I think.
Beautiful. Asha, as someone who's worked with you for the past year or so, I felt this piece revealed to me that I knew nothing about you. Because you're a very, secretive person, a mysterious person, if I may say. And I suspect there are many people who have known you for way longer than I have, who will read this piece and also realize that they don't know you. The first question that I want to ask you is, how did your, multicultural background, coupled with the global and local culture, the culture influences that you write about, that you grew up with, things like music and cuisine, how did that influence your sense of identity growing up? And how has that sense of identity evolved since?
Okay, so I don't think growing up I thought about identity a lot. Because I came from a blended family. When my mom and my baba got their talaka, their divorce, my mom remarried the banker called Mwilu. And so this story oscillates from these two locations. Mwilu moves us to a neighborhood called Savannah in Donholm back in the 90s. And these two men were very similar, very different, and also had some similarities. My baba introduced me to Bob Marley, and I love Bob Marley to date. And he also watched the news a lot. He still does. And so when we meet, we talk a lot about news. It's like, have you watched Al Jazeera? What's happening in Gaza? And when I do my stories, Baba will call me and be like, you missed this point, So of course, obviously now, looking back, you do see the sort of influence that people around you growing up had on you. Then Mwilu was this very eccentric guy. He rode a motorcycle to work. He kept an afro. Sometimes my mom would, blow his hair out and he'd plait cornrows. He'd go fishing with his friends. He loved the arts and culture. We grew up listening to a lot of music because of him. So lots of rumba. To date, my mom has kept his rumba CDs and vinyls. So I'm a record collector. And I used to think, oh, I'm so cool. But I'm not, because I collect records, I listen to music, I read books because of that introduction from him, right? I enjoy classical music sometimes, and going back to Dad's archives, I saw Beethoven, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is where it came from, right? You usually feel like you're the one who's formed sort of this identity that you've become, but it's a lot of bits and pieces, and it's not just from your parents, right? It's like this friend who reads a certain book, or a friend who owns poetry, and then all of a sudden, you come across a poem online, and you're like, oh, I love poetry. But it's these little influences that sort of trickle to you as a human being, and that form your identity. But beyond that, and this is what I'm exploring a lot now, it's lost identities. as someone who has a mixed heritage, I do feel a sense of like loss because, you know, some of my friends speak their mother tongue. I can't. And that's because of existing in very different spaces. So, you know, my Baba and I are now trying to find out who my grandfather really was and where he came from. He's this guy who seems to have been from Palestine, went through Jordan, then found himself in Somalia, and then in colonial Kenya came to Nairobi, in Pumwani, marries this woman, my maternal grandmother, who is Ngazija from Comoros Island. And so Baba already is complex. And then he meets my mom, whose mother is from Bukoba in Tanzania. And the father is from somewhere in Kenya. And these two then have me and my sister. And so, you know, when now you're all grown up, and of course because of the trajectory of my life, you don't really think about these things. So when I spoke to this friend of mine who urged me to write this story, they were always like, you know that's strange, right? Like people are not Ngazija and Palestinian and Kamba and, you know, Haya from Bukoba. People don't have such like very complex, you know, mixed identities. And so I think I haven't really thought about it much over the last 35 years of my life, but now I am.
Brilliant. And Asha, writing such a personal, nostalgic, writing all poignant stories really, it often involves revisiting memories. If you read Asha's piece and maybe you grew up in the 90s, you'll be like, yeah, I remember this, you know. It is so nostalgic. How did you approach the process of digging through these memories? And what strategies did you use to maintain emotional balance while writing?
I wish I had like a very intellectual answer, like Kaiser, you know, and say that I was a flaneur and I walked around the streets of Nairobi, but I didn't do that, right? I think I'm generally a very inward person. Yeah, some of my friends will be like, but I am. I think I had to unpack a lot of compartments and memories. And they were quite painful, some of them, because of course in the story you realize what happened to Dad, for example. And that was a very painful thing to write about. And I don't like going into those spaces. And that's why I love to listen to music or to now read the Quran and things like that. But my process was really just right. And because of the encouragement of my editor, it was just right and the memories will flow. So for me, the writing was very, very organic. The bits that I couldn't remember, I think my family knows I sat with them. I made my mom remember a lot of things on my behalf. I spoke to my dad. And then I opened Pandora's box because now he thinks we're doing this really big project together. But that was my process. It was really just write and unlock certain memories that you've locked away. My best writing happened, I think, 2 days when I allowed myself to be open and to go to places that I don't usually allow myself to go. And of course, vulnerability. So I'm not mysterious. I think I'm just private. So that was the big decision I had to make to break privacy.